the tagline we use is decentralized market making. Hummingbot is an open source orchestration tool that allows you to create and operate algorithmic trading bots that can trade on both centralized as well as decentralized exchanges. So today, I'll kind of give an intro, then Carlo will give a demo of Hummingbot, and finally, Tom from 0x, who's one of our key partners, is going to come and talk about what market making is like in the context of 0x. So the first thing I want to talk about today is liquidity. I was trying to think of a good analogy for why it's so important. And because in my younger days I was a bit of a party animal, I thought clubbing is probably the best analogy I could think of. So I think if you've ever been to a club, it's like it could be the best club in the world. Super nice, great decor, but if there's no one there, you're probably going to bounce pretty fast. But on the other hand, like a dingy, small place, but it's packed and there's a really good crowd, you're probably going to stay. And that's what liquidity is really like for a lot of crypto exchanges. The ones who have liquidity, it becomes a virtuous cycle, but the ones who don't, it's really hard to overcome that chicken egg problem and attract the critical mass of traders that an exchange needs to succeed. And I think this is where something that's misunderstood about liquidity is that you don't get it for free. Just because you launch an exchange or launch a new token doesn't mean that you're going to get liquidity off the bat. Instead, what you really need to overcome that critical mass are market makers. And so I think if you really think about financial markets, what I think we've realized is financial markets are really three-sided. Is there a thing? Okay, perfect. This is actually easier. So there's an exchange. Exchange really provides a place where people gather to trade. Traders go there to trade, but market makers fulfill that important job of creating the liquidity that attracts traders and gives them a good user experience. And so to illustrate that, I'll go through a few examples of different markets. And for each one, try to imagine if the market maker doesn't exist and how it would work. So for example, let's take a flea market. A flea market, is like this. People go there to buy and sell stuff. But imagine if there are no merchants and you had to walk around carrying your, like old living room, knickknacks, and you had to basically try to sell them to other people who are there. It's very unlikely that someone in the crowd wants to buy your, like little knickknack. But if there's a merchant there that's buying, selling from everyone, it makes transactions happen a lot more quickly. Similarly, if you've been gambling, there's something called a sports book. A sports book, the bookie sets a line and allows people to basically, trade with the bookie rather than having to find each other. And the third example is, of course, a financial market like the New York Stock Exchange, where specialists or designated market makers are the ones that really provide liquidity to individual traders. And so each of these are very different markets, but the role of that market maker intermediary is critical to getting the liquidity that this market needs to function. So market makers, what they do is they post buy and sell offers for an asset in a market, which allows anyone who wants to come to the market, if you want to buy, they'll sell to you. If you want to sell, they'll also buy from you as well. So it's really a symbiotic relationship. An exchange provides a venue, the market maker provides liquidity, and then traders have a good experience. And this is true for pretty much every single market in the world. So let's talk about liquidity in the context of decentralized exchanges for a sec. About a couple months ago, I looked at Radar Relay and Binance, and at basically the very same time, I clipped a snapshot, screenshot of the order books for two pairs, the WETH DIE pair on Radar and the ETH USDT pair on Binance. And you can see a pretty stark difference between these two markets. The bid-ask spread on Binance is 0.04%, but the bid-ask on Radar is 2.6%. And from a depth standpoint, Binance has almost 15 times deeper liquidity than Radar. So you can imagine if you're an individual trader and you have a choice of these two markets, you know, you're probably going to pick the one where it gives you the best depth and the best execution price. And why is that? And the reason is because there are very few market makers for decentralized exchanges. That's because of these three factors. From a technical perspective, it turns out that trading on a centralized exchange, crypto exchange, is very similar to trading on a centralized stock exchange. The API layer looks pretty much the same. It's very easy for a hedge fund or a market maker that trades, you know, on a stocks or currencies to start trading on Binance or another centralized exchange. But when I talk to them about the challenges of trading on a DEX, when I talk about gas, probabilistic blockchain confirmations, the risk of being front run, those are very foreign concepts to a lot of traditional quantitative market makers. And so given the lower volume right now, the incentive structure doesn't really exist for them to move into DEXs. In addition, the main risk that that a market maker faces is inventory. You have to maintain balances of both the base token as well as the quote token anytime you make a market in a trading pair. A lot of the assets that trade on DEXs are smaller cap tokens, perhaps less liquid, or they can be even things like CryptoKitties or Augur prediction markets. A lot of these are very illiquid, and therefore, for a large market making firm, you know, like if they're market making for Bitcoin and Ether, and those are very liquid, why would they, you know, go into a DEX? You know, so that inventory risk is also pretty important. And finally, is regulatory risk. In the U.S., if you're a hedge fund or like a regulated trading company, you have to register with FinCEN. And FinCEN, which is a U.S. agency, says you should know the identity of every person that you trade with. Now, a fund who's trading on a DEX, your counterparty is an Ethereum address. It's of like, you know, we're the ones who are most qualified to provide liquidity for decentralized exchanges. Technical issue. Okay. So basically, what Hummingbot really is a set of open source infrastructure that allows both individuals and institutions to provide liquidity to all types of decentralized exchanges and decentralized financial protocols. And in return, like as you market make, you make money, and exchanges and protocols get the liquidity they need to thrive and survive. So why is Hummingbot different? You know, when we first started this effort, we looked at a lot of the other trading bots out there, and you know, we tried all of them. You know, some were like the hosted version, some were open source, and we wanted to build something that was not only easier to use, but also completely open source, and also you know, something that respects the fact that private keys and API keys are sacred, and so security was number one when we first thought about this. So the ways we're different are, we used to run a quant fund. For regulatory reasons, we decided to shut it down. And so, but the tech stack that Hummingbot is built on really came from us running that quant fund. We ran a quant fund for about a year. We beat, I think we returned about 20% over that 1 year period versus Ethereum, which was down 30%, and Bitcoin, which was up about 9% over the same period. So we outperformed the market. And so Hummingbot is really built upon that tech stack. So it's definitely institutional grade. It's open source, as we mentioned. But the other feature that I think is interesting is that Hummingbot can trade both on centralized and on decentralized exchanges. And so when we looked at a lot of other bots out there, they really were only focused on one or the other. I think the ability to trade on both opens up a lot of opportunities to capitalize on the differences between centralized and decentralized exchanges. And finally, we were inspired by the design of Ethereum and Bitcoin mining clients when we built Hummingbot. And so if you think of like a Bitcoin mining node, it's a local client that uses a scarce resource, which is electricity, and it runs an algorithm, which is proof of work. And if you run it well, and if you're lucky, you make money. Similarly, Hummingbot also, it's a local client. It uses a scarce resource, which is your inventory. It runs an algorithm, which is market making or arbitrage. And you can make money, but you still have to be good, and you may have to be lucky. And so we believe that this local client architecture is the right design for a software market making client in the crypto world. A bit about the architecture. The architecture is actually quite simple. The client is in the middle. So Hummingbot, it basically helps you do two things. The first is that we provide plugins which provide the strategies that you can employ. And so the two that we're starting with are called cross-exchange market making, and the second is called arbitrage. In addition, we'll also add a regular market making strategy later on. These are basically Python files that are open source and visible to everyone. And so they're actually relatively basic, and we expect users to customize and extend them. So the arbitrage strategy, the code is basically buy low, sell high. And the other ones are slightly more complicated, but they're all basically some version of that. And on the other side, we have a bunch of connectors to different exchanges. And so what we're trying to do is abstract the idiosyncrasies of every single exchange so that when you call them from Hummingbot, you're calling the same functions every time and doing the same things, but it's doing something slightly different for every single exchange. So when you say post a limit order or get me the order book, you can call that same function and basically do something slightly different on both DDEX, Radar Relay, Binance, Coinbase, etc. Today we're starting with Radar, Relay, DDEX, and Binance, and we'll soon be opening up lots of other exchanges and protocols after that. So let me give you a quick example of how this cross-exchange market-making strategy works, because the way we think about it, this is probably, I think, one of the best ways that new users can start using Hummingbot because it's a relatively low-risk strategy, and I'll show you why. So if you recall the Binance and Radar Relay chart from earlier, this is kind of like a visual representation of that, where Radar Relay is wider, the market's wider, and Binance is tighter. So let's imagine that this market, Radar is trading where the highest buy offer is 96, and the lowest sell offer is 104. And the other side, Binance is a 99, 101 market. So here, this provides an opportunity for a Hummingbot user to run this cross-exchange market-making strategy. And so how it works is you would basically make a market somewhere between these two levels. So let's say you made a 98, 102 market on Radar Relay. So now you just wait. You wait for people to come and take your order because now you are the best offers in the Radar Relay order book. So let's say someone comes along and basically buys, takes your sell offer, and so you end up buying this asset at 98. At that point, Hummingbot will automatically go into Binance and take that offer, take that buy offer at 99 and sell on Binance at a price of 99. And so if you do this quickly enough and the bot automates this whole process, what you end up doing is you're locking in a $1 arbitrage profit. You've bought at 98 and you've sold at 99. Hummingbot manages automatically for you. All you have to do is set a spread, connect your Binance API key in your Ethereum wallet, and it will basically manage these orders for you and maintain that spread so that every time someone comes along, as long as you can react quickly enough, the bot reacts quickly enough, you're going to make that arbitrage profit. So what you're really doing here is you're essentially porting the liquidity that exists in Binance and you're giving it to Radar. And if you get traded, you're going to make that arbitrage profit, most of the time. So you can see this is actually a pretty simple strategy. It's not rocket science. And I think one misconception about algo trading, that in our experience people have is that they believe it's just like this black box model that you can give to anyone and they can make money. But in this case, you can see the strategy is actually very simple, but the requirements are you need the inventory dedicated on both Binance and also in your Ethereum wallet to do this. And so I actually equate algo trading to fishing. You have to be in the right time in the right place, but if you're patient and if a trader basically jumps on your bait, you should make money. And so the key is having this process running automatically 24/7 throughout the day, making more productive use of the capital rather than just sitting in your wallet. And so this is actually also why we're taking an open source approach. What we're open sourcing is the code. And so you can see this very basic kind of like pseudocode here on the left. This is a strategy file for an arbitrage type strategy. It basically says buy low, sell high. However, to use this, users need to basically set the configuration parameters for the strategy. What exchange will you trade on? Which trading pair are you going to make? Are going to make a market in? And what is the amount and what is a spread that you want to use? And so to actually run this, you need to have WETH and DAI in your Ethereum wallet, and you also need to have a balance of inventory on Binance in Ether and USDT. Given the near infinite number of markets out there, we believe that we as a firm don't have enough inventory to cover all the markets, and I would venture that not even the largest firms in finance have that because there's so many markets out there. But each of us, because we have our own inventory, we have our own accounts, the ability for everyone in crypto to contribute and add liquidity to the ecosystem, we think that's why an open source project like this makes sense. And I think this also kind of helps answer one question we get a lot, which is, will the market get saturated as we get more users? Because we're exposing this strategy, if everyone's using Hummingbot, does that diminish the number of opportunities for everyone? Obviously, the more users there are, the more competitive it will be to make money. But the way we think about markets is that they're really nodes on a graph. So today we're starting with basically 3 markets. And so there's 3 edges on that graph. But pretty soon, we're going to add a lot more markets very quickly. Because we're supporting Radar, we actually support any open order book 0x relayer. A lot of them, we're talking a lot of them right now. And so we expect that a lot of the open order book relayers on 0x will be on Hummingbot very soon. And so this picture is we're going to have many more nodes on the graph after a while.
I already have an instance of it running here. So this one, actually, we can see on the left of the screen is the interface, and on the right is Radar Relay. So right here, you can see I have my account open. There's no orders right now. I set it to trade 0x against WETH. And here, I just make sure I just load up my strategy that I had configured before. So I just unlock my wallet and loaded the configs I have previously set. And so now I just hit start. And you should see once I hit start, it will start generating the pricing and start running the logs here. And then you'll see that on the right side on Radar Relay, it should start generating orders live. So there, that's it. You're basically market making now. So you can see here, it created bid asks orders on 0x. On Radar Relay, we have it set so that it sets the orders, it sets an expiration on them. So every few minutes, it will refresh those if they haven't been taken. If they're taken, then it will hedge that on Binance and do the opposite trade. That's basically it. You can see as well in the order books that my orders are here. So I guess where they sit within the order book, so you see that they're actually live and actually making markets right now. And that's pretty much it.
Now, also, I should point out that I think there isn't like a magical moment yet, because the whole point of a bot is that you only want to trade when you're very likely to make money, right? And so that's not all the time. And so usually what we found is the point of having a bot is so you can run this overnight, and then so you don't have to look at it. And then in the morning, you can look at what trades it did. Hopefully, every trade it did, it made you a little bit amount of money every time. And so hopefully, it allows you to, instead of leaving your coins in your token inventory, you basically run this bot, and you can make something out of your tokens while providing liquidity to Radar, which is what they need.
Did it decide on the maker amount, like the make amount, based on looking at Binance? That we don't see Binance.
Yep.
Does it look at that and then all of a sudden?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Yeah. So there's you can either set the trade size yourself, or you can let the bot do it. And what the bot does is it tries to make sure that it looks at the order book on Binance, it looks at the order book on Radar, and there's some logic where it always tries to stay ahead of the best order on Radar, given that it can hedge any order on Binance. And so it takes basically, we use WebSocket connections to make sure that we're getting the live order books from both sides, and so that it's always reacting as quickly as we're fetching the data via WebSocket.
Is that for just price or price and size?
Price and size, yeah. So there's a size, there's sizing logic in the strategy. So actually, I would recommend looking at the strategy file. There's a bunch of logic in there that says, try to make this size. However, if there's not enough volume on the other side, reduce it and things like that.
Hey, I'm Tom. I run the product team at 0x. That was really awesome, by the way. I feel like we weren't hyping up the bot demo enough, but yeah, it's sick. I've been running Hummingbot in the alpha and been really, really impressed with the build quality. Yeah, I think I'll sort of talk about this a little bit in the prezo, but I think maybe 4 or 5 months ago, we sort of reoriented a lot of the company's roadmap around liquidity and sort of at every level of the company, figuring out ways to make our market making experience better. And I feel like at that time, I got connected to Michael and was oh, it was this thing that we wished for just sort of fell out of the sky. I was oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if market making were super easy? And then Michael's oh, we're working on decentralized exchange market making bot. And so yeah, really been awesome to work with the whole team, and glad to have you guys building with us. Cool. So who here knows about 0x, by the way, or that's somewhat familiar? Okay, that's everyone. Awesome. It's a good crew. So 0x is a decentralized exchange protocol built on top of the Ethereum blockchain, lets you trade assets peer-to-peer for free without a middleman. So I think when we talk about, we spend a lot of time talking about Ethereum nodes and market making strategies and tokens and all this kind of stuff. I think it's always helpful to zoom out occasionally and think why are we here? Why are we in this room? Why are we talking about this stuff? And I think what motivates us at 0x is about bringing open financial services to everyone in the world and sort of eliminating this geographic lottery. Right now, your access to different financial services depends on where you were born. If you were born the wrong time in the wrong place, you don't have access to the same services that someone else might in some other particular context. And so we want to democratize access to these financial services in the same way the internet has democratized access to information. And particularly, we're focusing on the exchange layer of the stack, because no matter what sort of asset of value, what sort of financial primitives you create, you need some sort of exchange for this value to flow freely. So when we talk about tokenization, we're sort of in this like early wave right now, right? Where we've seen like utility tokens come out, some new security tokens come out, some collectibles and stuff like that. But ultimately, we think there's going to be tens of thousands or millions of these different tokens. And I think we've sort of seen this thesis slowly become true over the past year or so. And naturally, millions of tokens mean there's going to be millions of different markets, and those markets are going to need liquidity in order to function correctly. So a little background on 0x. We launched V1 2017, V2 about a year after that. Starting to do some of our first governance work now, but already getting really good traction with a number of different types of relayers, doing large amounts of volume, trading all sorts of different types of tokenized assets on the Ethereum blockchain. And you maybe have seen some of our product launches. 0x Instant allows you to with one click buy any sort of tokenized asset on the Ethereum blockchain. 0x Launch Kit allows you to create a relayer in under a minute, which is pretty exciting. But I think all this stuff is sort of like table stakes, right? It's when you think about 0x, you're probably thinking like, oh, there's a bunch of relayers online, right? There's things like Paradex or Radar Relay, all these open order book relayers, and that's sort of what we've been, I think, focusing on a lot over the past year or so. And we want more relayers because that's going to allow us to serve more traders and sort of bring more people online, right? Different types of markets means different types of traders, different types of user experiences, and we sort of foresee this world where there's going to be thousands or millions of these different types of markets. It's also, I realize, looks very similar to your slides now. When you have more traders, that provides a stronger incentive to provide more orders for market makers, so you have more network liquidity. And when you have more network liquidity, traders get more assets at better prices, right? I want to be trading on the exchange that has the most liquidity, not in the empty club. I think what's really cool about 0x is we call it network liquidity because when you actually have this liquidity, it can flow to where it's needed, whether that's another DApp or whether that's another relayer. So relayers across the world at different types of markets that have the same asset pairs can share their order books, so we get deeper spreads than any individual relayer can get by themselves. So you no longer have to go out and build all these different siloed relayers. Everyone can sort of work on one common liquidity pool. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So ultimately at 0x, I think we've previously been focused on relayers and traders and building a lot of products and services for these two personas. But I want to talk a little bit more about network liquidity. I think internally, a couple months ago, we've sort of reoriented the company around liquidity. And we have an internal goal that we want to be the most liquid DEX ecosystem for a number of key pairs in the next 3 months. So what does that actually mean? Well, when we think about liquidity, we're usually measuring by looking at slippage, right? Slippage meaning when I want to buy or sell a particular asset, how far am I drifting from market price? And when you want to buy or sell more of that asset, you drift more from market price. And this provides a really bad user experience, right? If I want to buy $10,000 worth of an asset at a given time, I could be drifting several percentage points from market price. And so the end price that I'm getting is not really what I was quoted, right? Maybe I was quoted $1, and then by the time I'm finished buying, I'm now at $1.20. And suddenly I have 20% slippage on this purchase, and I end up getting a much worse price than maybe when I started. So ultimately, we want to make sure that when we don't drift that much. So when we talk about slippage, we're looking at how much we drift from market price for a transaction of X dollars for token Y. So a lot of people think about liquidity, think about depth, and depth is definitely a large part of it. And think about spread. Spread is also definitely part of it. Think about uptime, making sure that there's actually bots out there that are running, so there's not like liquid books during the day and illiquid books during the night. But ultimately, slippage kind of captures a lot of this kind of stuff. And so when we have low slippage and we have like a great user experience, we know that all these things are most likely true. So in order to have low slippage, as with any sort of platform that exists, whether that's Shopify or anything like that, when you make something approachable and profitable, you sort of solve the problem. If people can make money doing your thing and it's like very easy to do, then your thing will be very popular. And so for us, if we can make market making approachable and profitable, then we think we're going to solve the liquidity problem. So here's sort of a peek at how 0x is organized internally. We think about the sort of the core protocol layer. That's probably what most people are familiar with, building the actual smart contracts. Developer experience, they're building tooling, documentation, everything that makes it easier to build a relayer or trade on 0x. And then there's growth, and they're focused on getting more users and getting more volume on top of the relayers that developers are building on top of 0x. So sort of 3 different layers of the stack. But ultimately, at every different layer and all these different timelines, we're all sort of focused on getting more liquidity onto the protocol. So I want to talk a little bit more about how we're sort of thinking of this on different timescales and sort of the different initiatives that we're working on right now to help address this problem. And just to give you a sense of like how serious we are, this is sort of our internal like slippage dash. And we look at this every day. As a team, we sort of review this every week, sort of tracking our progress for a number of key pairs, for a number of key dexes, and making sure that like, over time we're trending downwards. So the next 3 months, and this is already sort of happening actually, we kicked off January with our Market Maker Grant Program. So this is a program that sort of complements the Ecosystem Acceleration Program, which is the program that we use to give a grant to Hummingbot, which is awesome. The Market Maker Grant Program provides monetary incentives for market makers to come onto 0x, and simultaneously we give you sort of a white glove treatment with the 0x engineer. So it's not just, hey, we're going to pay you for some liquidity. We will handhold you and walk you through the actual technical migration of building custom market making tooling on top of 0x, so you can be an effective market maker and you don't have to worry about a lot of the technical barriers that Michael mentioned. So we launched this in January, didn't quite know if there'd be any interest, and we were like really overwhelmed with how many people want to market making on dexes. We had over 100 people in the queue, and we've onboarded 10 of them so far. We're giving out over $15,000 in, actually, next one. We're also giving out free infrastructure credits to market makers to sort of reduce some of the barrier to entry as well. So, right now you could be running your own market making bot, spending maybe thousands of dollars a month on AWS bills or on Ethereum nodes. We've partnered with AWS, DigitalOcean, and Alchemy to give that all away for free for people who build with 0x. So zooming back a little bit, Market Maker program is sort of an accelerator-like experience where you're meeting with the 0x team on a bi-weekly basis. You have a designated engineering support who's going to help you with any questions or problems that you run into. And we give you up to $15,000 in incentives for actually building your bot and having it start running on 0x with some particular milestone. We also give you technical support, and so we have sort of like an on-call service on Discord. So if you ever have any issues, we're here to help you, and we can sort of walk you through any problems that you might run into. If this is something that you're interested in, we're about to launch wave 2. So sort of beyond the 10 that we originally onboarded, we're going to start working through this queue. So if you want to market make on 0x and anyone who runs Hummingbot actually qualifies for the Market Maker program, you can sign up at 0x.org/marketmaker, and we'll sort of walk you through the program when you get accepted. So that's sort of an immediate term, right? We want more market makers on 0x. But ultimately, there are some sort of like structural issues with 0x that we want to fix to make sure that like profitability is like baked into the protocol proper. If we can make market making even easier and we can make it super profitable, then I think we solve a lot of the other problems with liquidity on the protocol. So as some of you who might be reading our blog are familiar with, we recently launched recently published a sort of upgrade to the protocol or a complement to the protocol, which we call coordinators. I think as we sort of saw in the demo, some relayers that employ the open order book model require you to go on chain to cancel orders. 0x has an off-chain order relay model with an on-chain settlement. But if you want to cancel your order, you actually have to submit an Ethereum transaction to make sure that the order is no longer valid. And this is get really expensive if you're bidding a lot on gas to make sure you actually get your order in, and just kind of confusing and like worrisome because there's not sort of that guaranteed finality that you get with an off-chain cancellation model. So I put my transaction in and say, hey, please cancel this order so no one else can fill it. But then I have to wait for it to get mined. I have to make sure that I actually know that there was not a block reorg and the transaction actually was mined. No one front ran me, all that kind of stuff. And so it makes it kind of stressful to market make on an open order book relayer. With coordinators, you get that open order book style network liquidity model where liquidity can be shared with multiple relayers, be used in multiple dApps, but you also get off-chain cancellations. So it's a little bit of best of both worlds, where as a market maker, it's super convenient, it's a really great UX, but your liquidity can now be used in other DeFi protocols or in other relayer contexts. We're also upgrading our contracts to be what we call language agnostic, meaning you can take any programming language that you want and use 0x. So right now we have really good tooling and documentation for TypeScript and for Python, which we find to be the most popular. But a lot And then lastly, we are launching 0x Mesh in a few months, which makes it much easier for trades to get aggregated and propagated through the 0x network. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit right now. So 0x Mesh, it's a peer-to-peer network for sharing orders. When I talked about network liquidity a little bit earlier, it was a little bit of a, it's a little bit of a, I think, like a rough vision right now. It's something that we want to see, but actually implementing network liquidity right now is somewhat tricky. So right now, when we talk about network liquidity, we suggest to relayers that they implement what we call the standard relayer API. So this is just a common interface for interacting with other relayers. It works on HTTP and WebSockets. And we sort of suggest to relayers that they implement this API, and then we build tooling and we sort of show relayers who actually implement the API. So this way you're not writing custom integrations for every single relayer. Write one client, one piece of code, add in different endpoints, and it all sort of works. It makes it really easy to aggregate. But there's some shortcomings, right? We have to actually have everyone implement it, which is kind of redundant. It's a lot of engineering effort. It's really hard to make it compliant. People can sort of screw up small details in it, which then makes it really hard to actually debug your code or make sure that your code is actually working correctly. It's not really easy to adapt to new token standards, where we have ERC20 and ERC721 with ERC1155 support coming. And so upgrading this API to support all these new types of token standards can be really tedious and tricky. And you have to know who all the other relayers are, right? Maybe you know about Radar Relay, but you don't know about some great relayer in India that just popped up. You have to know about all these people ahead of time in order to actually ping them and find their endpoints and aggregate their liquidity. So sort of a topography of what's going on right now. You might have some relayers who are SRA compliant, like Radar Relay, that can plug into traders really easily and can be used in something like 0x Instant. But all these other relayers that might not have SRA, they're sort of siloed, right? They aren't really living up to this definition of network liquidity or this vision of network liquidity. So with 0x Mesh, it's one common implementation that all the projects can use. So you just clone this repo, run it, and now you're suddenly connected to this broad network of other people who are running the same node. Compliance is automatic because you're using this one common code base that everyone else is also using. And it works with any sort of order format or any sort of token type that comes out in the future. So if you want to use this to relay, Dutch auction contracts or, CryptoKitties or whatever sort of, crypto commodity that comes out, it all works with Mesh. We also add peer discovery directly into the product. So when you spin up Mesh, it's a little bit like running BitTorrent with a tracker, where we will just find other people who are also running Mesh, connect you with them, and now you can get access to their order book as well. So with Mesh, you can think of it sort of like the second topography, where many of the different relays are connected to each other through Mesh, and then they can serve up the orders that they want to serve up to their own traders. So it's sort of this way to get that order propagation and that order discovery that we sort of envisioned when we started 0x, but in a much easier way. You can still have relayers in here, but ultimately the liquidity sharing is being fulfilled through Mesh. We also sort of have this vision of what we call sort of a serverless relayer, where all you need is sort of a front-end UI, and Mesh will run natively in the browser. Mesh compiles down to WebAssembly, so it can just run inside your browser, just like any other piece of code. So users maintain their same orders, and it works really well for sort of these long tail tokens where maybe there's not actually a designated relayer yet, but you still want to be able to trade assets with other people. So it's written in Go, compiles to WebAssembly, and I don't think there's anything else interesting. It's basically a peer-to-peer order relay mechanism that sort of sits on top of the core settlement layer that's built on top of 0x. We'll have a beta coming out by the end of the half, and then we'll have a mainnet version coming out in the summer. So really hoping that people are going to get creative with this. I think for market makers in particular, it makes it really easy to see global state of the order book and then broadcast orders to anyone who might want to see it instead of broadcasting orders to only a particular relayer that you're familiar with. So that's sort of Mesh in a nutshell. And then in the longer term, so sort of looking 12 months down the line, we're working on what we call a zero-knowledge proof-based scaling solution, working with Starkware, as some of you may have seen, which enables a trustless 10 times increase in throughput. So instead of relying on a maybe POA-based sidechain, we're using zero-knowledge proofs to batch hundreds or thousands of transactions together into a single, or hundreds or thousands of trades into a single transaction, and then settling all those trades trustlessly on the Ethereum blockchain in one single batch. So we're hoping that this is going to be sort of the best approach for L2 scaling solution for the next couple of years. We're also working on some native liquidity incentives into the protocol. So right now, obviously, you can. as a market maker, you can make money on spread, or you can set up contracts with particular tokens or particular relayers that you want to work with. But ultimately, or you can work with the 0x team and work on a market making grant program. But ultimately, the 0x core team isn't going to be around forever, and we don't want to sort of rely on this sort of system of back channels all the time. And so for 0x to be successful longer term, we want this thing to be sort of self-sustaining, where working on 0x is inherently profitable. And we think that's going to come through creating a system of trustless liquidity incentives that guarantee payment to market makers and sort of incentivize market makers to come onto the protocol, with whatever sort of token they actually want to market make. So we'll have some more details on that soon. But yeah, sort of zooming out again a little bit, we think the 0x ecosystem is going to change quite a bit in the next few months. You can think of sort of right now, there's individual relays, sort of with that network topography that we went through a little bit earlier, where maybe you're connecting directly to Radar Relay or connecting directly to Paradex or 0x Instant or something like that. But we think ultimately adding these new layers to enable off-chain cancellations, faster, more efficient order propagation, or trustless batching of transactions is going to allow market making to be much more profitable and much easier, and sort of help us solve this problem around liquidity on DEXs. So yeah, that's the 0x roadmap in a very quick nutshell.
We want to take a couple questions. I know people may have questions, so if you do, does anyone have a question for either me or Tom or Carlo? Okay, yeah, speaking to the mic, please. The mic over there.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, yeah. So previously, Michael, you mentioned you're gonna adding more agents, basically adding more decentralized exchanges in order to solve the problem you mentioned. And then Tom just mentioned another thing called a mesh. So basically, essentially, all the decentralized, not all, hopefully all, right? He wants all. Probably not gonna happen all, but a majority of them were running on this mesh. So that means majority of decentralized exchange essentially will have same or similar depths. What that means is that no matter how many you add, the age end up the same. You know what I'm talking about?
Right. Yeah. So I think that's true for maybe like certain types of exchanges. So for example, the decentralized exchange we think of today, like Radar Relay, Paradex, I think given a global order book, we can expect some type of convergence there. But I think that the way we think about market making, I think 0x as well, is I think there are many types of markets that are quite different. So you have futures markets. You may have markets for like non-fungible tokens like CryptoKitties, prediction markets like Veil and Augur, even things like sports betting, which just recently launched with a firm called SportX. So each of these are very different markets. And so while I think certain markets, given a global order book, may kind of converge, the fact that you have all these different types of markets means that you have kind of like these different, kind of like essentially different global order books for different products. If that makes sense.
A question about the example you guys showed with the say Ether and DAI and Ether and Tether. So recently, like the DAI token's price was kind of dropped down quite a bit. Like, there's no way you can guarantee the DAI will be equal to Tether. Like, do you have logic to?
Yeah.
To
so it's actually when we actually launched our last alpha release on Monday, that was the first one that supported cross-exchange market making on Radar. And so we ran it, and we actually realized this, the fact that DAI is trading at 96% of USDT, makes it really difficult to treat them as equivalent. So actually one of our engineers basically built a conversion class in like one day, which dynamically pulls a price feed from some API and uses that price feed to essentially calculate a conversion rate between DAI and USDT, which is automatically taken into account when you market make.
Okay, that sounds great. And another follow-up question is like, I saw you guys make an order, like a one buy order, one sell order. Like, do you have like a plan or a config where you can make multiple different prices orders?
Yeah, it's a great question. So not currently. It is on a roadmap. Right now, to enable that, you can just run another instance of the bot and then kind of like set a larger trade size, and it'll basically do the same thing. It'll run it in a separate process.
Cool, thank you.
Any plans for like transaction cost analysis type tooling?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think we recognize that this first version of the bot, is still pretty rudimentary from a kind of like a performance analysis perspective. Right now, users have to calculate take gas into account, take fees into account. But in the future, we will be able to kind of like abstract and factor it into that overall performance analysis. Cool. Yeah. So just as a final word, I think that as you saw, I think there's a pretty like a natural symbiotic relationship between kind of like folks working on market making and folks working on exchange protocols. And I think that's why I think we had a really successful partnership so far with 0x. But I think overall, it's not just about one project. I think the reason I think we're all excited about crypto is that unlike the regular financial world where everyone seems like trying to compete with each other, in crypto there's a lot more kind of like cooperation. And so whether it's between exchanges and market makers, or between like lending protocols, derivatives protocols, spot trading protocols, and market makers, I think we're all in this ecosystem because we want to build a better financial world. And I think that means working with each other, not against each other.